Jack Andrews here. Thank you for checking out this episode of my webcast. This one was 5 ways to work smarter, not harder. If you like this video, feel free to subscribe and set the notification so you can be notified next time I go live. Thank you and enjoy. You can work smarter by automating many of your tasks. Case in point, you could walk the schedule for every NBA team as I just suggested, or you could dump that schedule into some kind of data frame like Excel and write a quick script to identify all the times that a team plays 3 times in 4 nights and how rested their opponent is in those games. That's even easier than it seems. Excel has functions to determine the number of days between 2 dates, and expertise is really not needed for this. So automation is a key component of being a successful sports bettor. In fact, when I reached out to my friends, this was the topic they had the most feedback on. You can read the quotes on the screen there from 2 highly successful sports bettors, Rufus Peabody and Spanky. Automation is wide-ranging, and you can get very creative with it. You can use it to be prepared with a list of lines to handicap. You can use it to process the final scores at night and grade your wagers. As Rufus says, you can use it for any task where intuition or expertise is not needed. The more you automate and the sooner you automate, the more time savings you have during the course of a season. In fact, I'd contend that the more you automate, the more your lifetime expected profit increases. If you can free up bandwidth for other projects, you can realize other revenue streams. I've seen examples of automation that blow my mind. And these aren't just bots that are placing wagers automatically, but rather information gatherers who are more efficient at finding and processing relevant information than any human could possibly be. Now, don't feel like you need to learn a coding language to handle your automation. The earliest automation I ever used was the web query function of Excel. It required almost 0 coding, and since then Microsoft has added an add-on they call Power Query, which is far more powerful and versatile than web query ever was. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of Excel, but as I've mentioned in an earlier webcast, it has a fairly easy learning curve. Everyone is familiar with it in some way, and it's greatly lowered the barrier to entry for a lot of sports bettors. If you don't use Excel, Google Sheets has much of the same functionality as Excel, and it's a bit more portable. So if you don't have access to Excel, you definitely have access to Google Sheets. Another non-programming option to use for automation is Google Alerts. Basically, Google Alerts scour the web and find mention of whatever you tell it to look for: player information, team news, etc. There are a lot of ways Google Alerts can help you reduce the time you spend looking for information for handicapping purposes. Google Alerts can be an overwhelming product to get a handle on, but if you use it, you can really get a jump on a lot of sharp bettors to some solid information. It's worth noting that creativity can pay when it comes to automation. So there are a lot of bettors out there that might find your automation extremely valuable to what they do. You can use automation tools as a currency to buy your way into other relationships and other plays. It's a useful product for trade because it doesn't take away from any angle you might have. It just automates the information and enhances it. So you can be good at automation and maybe not so good at sports betting, but this is a way to possibly connect and profit from relations with other bettors. Every sports bettor needs automation to do what they do. And if you can master automation, you can become a very valuable resource to someone. So the next way you could work smarter, not harder, is something I like to call shorten the game. It comes from a concept in sports. If you're coaching and you get the lead, you want to shorten the game. In football, you run the ball more so the clock stops less. In basketball, you utilize more of the 24-second clock before you attempt a shot. Well, it has an application in sports betting in combating variance. There are many variables that come into play when you handicap any sport. Let's take, for instance, Major League Baseball. You need to factor the lineups, the starting pitchers, the bullpen, the weather, the umpire, the list goes on. If you can reduce some of those variables, you lower the implied variance that you're playing into. For instance, if you find you don't have time to work through all the variables in a baseball game, you could focus on just the first 5 innings, and then you'd be able to eliminate the bullpen. You could focus on just the first inning, and you can eliminate the 7, 8, 9 batters. You could focus on a player prop and eliminate pretty much everything except for the batter and the pitcher that they're going up against. If you see what I mean, you can shorten the game to go from a large, expansive handicapping down to more manageable, bite-sized problems to solve. So my initial title for this section was derivatives, but I didn't want to sidetrack what we're hoping to accomplish with the derivatives. We could spend an entire webcast talking about derivatives, and someday we probably will. Derivatives are no longer priced as just a half or a quarter of the game line. They are situational in nature. Understanding derivative pricing is a huge leap in the evolution of a sports bettor. So for now, let's just say that the reason a sports bettor would want to shorten the game is to narrow the focus of his handicapping. You want to be able to handicap with fewer variables, not more. If you find you're not able to necessarily shorten the game, then maybe you should attempt to shorten the schedule. I've cautioned before that it's really tough to effectively handicap more than one sport at a time. There's no shame in ignoring certain sports because you just don't have the time to get a handle on them. Likewise, there's no shame in committing to just one part of a season. Baseball is a long, grueling sport to wager on. It's also a sport that plays differently over the course of the season. And the best baseball handicappers I know stop betting baseball by the time summer starts. Their reasons for shortening the schedule might not be the same as yours, but if they're doing it, you should consider why. So back to derivatives, though. Taking the time to identify which derivatives would enable you to shorten the game might take a little extra effort on your part, but then again, it can pay off in the long run. Of course, be aware that limits are lower and tolerances are more shallow when you dip into the world of derivatives. And again, make sure that the derivatives you choose can be handicapped using less variables, not more. Personally, the sport I use derivatives on the most is baseball. It's also probably the most statistical of all the major US sports, which immediately lends itself to derivative markets. I started betting first innings because I found the data necessary made it a great use of my time. When that market got more efficient, I moved on to second innings and in-play betting. I automated most of this so that it got to the point where I'd have my scripts watch the game, and then they'd send me a text message between innings if there was a situation to bet on in the next inning. I no longer had to spend hours watching the games to identify an angle. It just got text messaged right to me. You can't complain about that. So there is a precaution when it comes to identifying derivatives, though, and there's a tendency for people to overfit the data. Here's an example. You're an NHL bettor, and you decide that instead of betting the full game, you're only going to wager on the first periods. You run the numbers, and you find that certain teams are much more higher scoring in the first period than others that are extremely less scoring. You take that data and you use it as your basis for betting the first period. Unfortunately, you need to realize that in everything, there's going to be a distribution to the data. Just because a team has a great record in the first period doesn't belie their overall prediction. It could just be variance. So for whatever reason, many bettors seem to fall for small sample size conclusions when dealing with derivatives, more so than if they're dealing with the full game. Just make sure there's a valid hypothesis behind why a team would be different in a derivative than what you'd expect them to be in the full game. So the next tip enabling you to work smarter, not harder, is teamwork.